In this video, I turn this utterly horrible VR FPS virtual nightmare into this beautiful VR FPS experience, and I do it all with just one mouse click. Hyperbole? Clickbait? Let's find out now from an older gamer's perspective. I've recently obtained a Pimax Crystal Light headset, which I am very excited about as it has a DisplayPort cable that connects directly to my graphics card, and also it has a higher resolution than my Quest 3. Not to mention the Crystal Light also offers better contrast theoretically thanks to larger, better quality QLED panels. The only problem I face is all these extra pixels in the Crystal Light need extra performance from my PC to display those pixels, a problem that is especially poignant for people like me who run mid-tier graphics cards, the 4070 Super in my case, twinned with a mid-tier CPU, the 13600K. In fact, if I leave all of my iRacing settings as I would normally have them for the Quest 3, I find my VR experience in the Crystal Light looks something like this. Here you are looking at me racing a practice lap, just a practice lap, with no other cars present on the track at Okayama in the MX-5. This track is a little performance intensive in VR, but in the Quest 3, using the settings I recommended in this video, I can usually obtain a steady 90 frames per second, even with 35 cars on the track in a mixed class race. However, when the Pimax Crystal Light has those exact same settings in iRacing, the FPS performance is pretty dire. As you can see here, iRacing can barely maintain 70 FPS, which is a bit of a disaster when you consider the Crystal Light is set to 90 Hz. And it should be giving me 90 FPS, not 20 FPS less than I am aiming for. And yes, I could lower the refresh rate on the Crystal Light to 72 Hz, sure. I could also lower the resolution of the Crystal Light to, say, low. And I could even reduce some of the iRacing settings, such as MSAA to ×2, for example. And all of that would help me to obtain a stable frame rate. I have tried it and this does work. However, I don't like to turn things down. I'm a geek, I like to turn things up. But as it turns out, I don't need to turn anything down to get a rock steady display of 90 FPS using the Crystal Light when it is set to medium or 0.75 of its capability, and it's set to 90 Hz. And I'm also using my current favorite iRacing settings. How am I doing this? Easy. And this is where the aforementioned single mouse click comes into play. You see, iRacing have released an additional feature for Season 3 of 2025 that is aimed solely at VR users. And yes, you really do access it with just one click. This one here. All you have to do is go to the Graphics tab in iRacing, and at the top here, change SPS to MVP. It actually says foveated bracket MVP close bracket. I'll come back to the details of the foveated part of that later in this video. You must close your sim racing session down once you've made this selection, and you must use the OpenXR option when you relaunch iRacing, otherwise these settings won't work. But once you've done this, bam, you witness a little VR miracle. In this example on the right, I am again driving a practice lap at Okayama in the MX-5. Every setting for the Crystal Light and for iRacing is exactly the same in both examples. The only difference is I'm using MVP on the right and SPS on the left. And this gives a real boost in performance in VR and creates a very stable 90 FPS pretty much the whole way around the track. And this is literally all you need to know to get started when using this new MVP feature for iRacing. So you could just turn this video off now, go and try the setting, have some fun. However, if you want to know a bit more about this feature and how you can increase your performance even more with a couple of ini file edits, then stay tuned.
Sorry about this, kids, but stay tuned.
What is MVP? Okay, so we've established that MVP does wonders for VR users, especially those with a lower tier GPU. But in case you are wondering just what MVP does, here is a very rough and ready explanation of it. MVP, multi-view projection, is an NVIDIA-only method of improving performance by reducing the number of pixels the graphics card needs to render at full resolution by using a version of fixed foveated rendering. When fixed foveated rendering is enabled natively in iRacing via the MVP setting, the display is split into two areas: a center zone that is rendered at full resolution and a second outer area that is rendered at a lower resolution. This means that anything in your direct line of sight when looking forward should be at 100% resolution, but anything outside this center zone is displayed at a lower resolution. Lowering the resolution of the outer zone means the GPU needs to draw less detail in that area, and thus the overall GPU load becomes lighter, allowing your system to deliver the FPS you desire, and also allowing you to bump up some of those settings in iRacing if you so wish. How much effect this has on your VR experience will depend on you and your personal reaction to fixed foveated rendering. Personally, at first, I found the default MVP fixed foveated rendering setting a little bit distracting, as areas outside the center zone appear just a bit pixelated, and those areas can include the side mirror and the instrument panel, so they're not a zero subject. It matters. That being said, I did get used to this fairly quickly and really mostly stopped seeing it as being pixelated after a while, although having to physically look down at my instrument panel to stop it looking slightly pixelated was a slight immersion breaker for me personally. Your mileage may vary. That being said, any visual hardship incurred from using fixed foveated rendering natively inside iRacing can be offset by knowing your frame rate is now much more stable, even on a crowded track like here in the production car challenge at Oran in a live race, which is often very taxing, even on a mid-tier GPU like the 4070 Super. For a more detailed explanation than I could ever hope to offer, plus some real insights into how various graphics cards react to the new MVP fixed foveated feature in iRacing, I would highly encourage you to take a look at Benchmark Odyssey's latest videos on this subject. They give a detailed breakdown on just how much performance you can recoup by selecting this new setting. There is a link to this channel in the description below.
Details matter.
How to adjust the fixed foveated rendering in iRacing. What about if you want to fine-tune the way fixed foveated rendering works inside MVP and determine the sort of quality levels being used, either adjusting the level of pixelization offered by fixed foveated rendering to increase performance, or removing it as much as possible because your system is so powerful you just don't care. Fortunately, there is an easy way to do both via the ever-trusty ini file edits. By opening the iRacing folder in your Documents area, you can double-click on the OpenXR ini file, this one here, to display this in Notepad, where you can edit the appropriate values. You are looking for foveated outer picked res and foveated insert width picked, with both rolling off the tongue nicely. Programmers, yeah, you've got to love them. And here is a helpful but highly exaggerated graphic that I have created to help you visualize what they both actually do. It's exaggerated, okay? Can you remember that? Because the actual in-sim effect is difficult to capture via software such as OBS. So bear that in mind, okay? It's exaggerated. So in simple terms, these two settings tell iRacing how to split your view between sharp and pixelated zones to help reduce GPU load. The first one, foveated outer picked res, sets the rendering resolution of the outer peripheral area of your view, by which I mean the parts of your vision outside the central area of focus, just here in fact. The default setting of 35 means the peripheral edges are rendered at 35% of the full resolution. The second setting is foveated inset width picked, which sets the width and height of the high resolution central area where your eyes are directly focused, this area here. The default setting of 40 means the central area of your view is rendered at 40% of full width and full height. It's important to realize with this second setting that we are talking about the size of this area, not the resolution. That will still be what you have set it in your VR headset and in the iRacing graphics tab. So what should you use for your system? If you have a mid-tier CPU, a 4070 or a 3080 or something in that area, you would probably be best to leave these settings at their default values of 35 and 40. I have a 4070 Super and these default settings gave me about 25 to 35% more GPU headroom, allowing me to turn some of the settings in iRacing up a bit without losing too many frames. However, if you have a lower tier GPU, maybe a 4060 or a 3070 or even a 3060 Ti, you could try reducing foveated outer pick res to 25 and foveated inset width picked to 25. These are the minimal values you can use, but it should mean you are able to race without too many drop frames in most scenarios without sacrificing graphical fidelity. On the other hand, if you are lucky enough to own a 4090 or something better, 5090 perhaps, then you could go the other way and set foveated outer pick res at 50 and foveated inset width picked at 50. These are currently the maximum values for fixed foveated rendering using the MVP setting. The choice is yours. Let me know in the comments what settings you use and what you can achieve with your GPU.
This I shall achieve.
Conclusions. This update by iRacing is great news for anyone who wants to use VR but who doesn't have an expensive PC that can cope with the demands of VR. It's not going to work miracles on your system, let's be clear, but it can help alleviate anyone who is struggling to get decent frame rates. So, no clickbait, no hyperbole. The new MPV setting with its native application of fixed foveated rendering inside the iRacing graphics engine really is a one-click solution for VR performance issues, with the caveat that some INI file tweaking might also be needed to get the best from your particular system. It's also worth mentioning that MPV can have a slight effect on your CPU, and how slight this will be is dependent on the CPU in your computer. A little too early in the release of this feature to say just how much effect this is going to have, but I can tell you that on my system, the 13600K, there was a minimal uptick in CPU usage. It was just nothing to worry about, nothing outrageous certainly. Either way, for VR users of iRacing, the MPV setting is a clear win. And it's nice to see that iRacing themselves are starting to regard VR users as a group of sim racers worth spending actual development time on. This is probably good news for the whole of sim racing, or at least as seen from the consumer's point of view. The native implementation of fixed foveated rendering in iRacing is so good and so simple to use. The other sim racing titles probably don't have any choice now but to figure out their own version. Certainly all serious sim racing titles on the market or due for release will need to include a version of native fixed foveated rendering in their software. Otherwise, iRacing will just become even more dominant than they are now, and that's probably not a good thing. I have spent a good deal of time on iRacing and not much time talking about the Pimax Crystal Light, although all of the captures in this video are from using the Crystal Light. And that's because I want to talk about this headset in detail in a separate video, which will be released soon. I have been taking my time producing a Pimax Crystal Light review because I really want to get under the skin of this headset before I start to give my opinion on what I think it can and can't do. That being said, so far I am quietly impressed by what the Crystal Light can actually do, even on my mid-tier system. So a review of the Crystal Light should be available on this channel soon, where I can explore the good and the bad of this headset. In the meantime, I hope you found this video helpful, and until the next one, race clean, and I'll see you on track. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button, and if you haven't already done so, subscribe. Click the little bell icon if you want to be notified of any future videos.